Welcome to the J.D. Levy and Associates Calibration Point podcast. Our podcasts are designed to bring a conversational exploration of key topics that we believe will provide value and insight to those serving in the nonprofit sector. We will highlight new developments in the field, latest research, and things we're learning from our own clients that we can share. If there are topics that you would like to see explored, please send them to us through our website at jdlevyassociates.com.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to our Calibration Point podcast. I'm really excited today to have Phil Powell. He is the Associate Dean of Academic Programs at the IU Kelley School of Business and also an economist by training. And Phil, I'm just excited to have you on to just talk about inflation and why people who care about the nonprofit sector should have some understanding of what's going on in the economy right now and not operate just based on assumptions or fear or anything, but really have some sense of logic behind, okay, this is what we ought to be paying attention to. So I'm just going to throw that out to you as a starter point. What should we in the nonprofit sector be paying attention to? What should we understand? What's the reality? Wherever you want to take us on this journey.
Sure. Thanks, Jamie, for the opportunity. And, inflation is something we don't know much about unless you've studied economics, right? And even if you studied economics, it was a historical legacy from the 70s, right? But economics is very clear on how inflation gets generated, and it follows from what we see right now. And I'll talk about the impact of inflation in just a minute, but a lot of us might be asking, why all of a sudden are we experiencing 8% inflation? Let me give just a little quick insight there. It's sort of a perfect storm. The federal government was very generous in the distribution of aid during the pandemic, which actually saved us from economic catastrophe. It was, people talk about how divided Washington is. They deployed that aid very quickly, the Trump administration and the Democrat Congress. We had a lot of spending by the government. It did avert economic catastrophe. Actually, in 2021, bankruptcies and foreclosures were at a historical low. Those are typically measures of social stress that we look at as economists during a recession. So mission accomplished on avoiding social catastrophe during the pandemic. Of course, I don't want to minimize the fact that we've lost 1 million Americans from the crisis. So the federal government spent a lot of money. The Federal Reserve wanted to err on the side of caution and cheap capital and low interest rates. So they kept interest rates really low, which means they pumped a lot of cash into the economy.
Okay.
Meanwhile, households were saving a lot of money. They weren't spending a lot of money. And so COVID starts to retreat a little bit. We come roaring out and everybody's wanting to spend money. So, and as we know, when you have a lot of people wanting to spend money and there's just a little bit of stuff out there, and companies can't keep up, the price is going to go up. So there's a demand side to this, but also you've got two what we call supply side effects. In terms of percent of the population, the labor force is 3% less. We have 3% less people than we did in 2019. Most of that is because of demographics. A lot of baby boomers have been retiring, and the good stock market and sort of this rediscovery of what life is about, and that life can be short, accelerated baby boomers that exit into retirement from the labor force. So that's the main driver. So we have fewer people to work, which means you have to pay people more. And then, of course, we have, whether it's the shutdown of ports in China, whether it's the Ukraine war, or whether it's our own supply chain interruptions, it's harder to get stuff on time, which increases the price. So we not only have households and businesses and government spending more money, which increases the demand for goods and services. At the same time, we've had a reduction in our production capacity or a reduction in our supply.
Right.
And Economics 101 tells us that prices are going to go up in that regard. So we have this perfect storm going on. The only thing that can cure inflation is for higher interest rates to happen. So you have to go back to 1978 and 1979 to realize that the medicine for inflation is very bitter. And so the Federal Reserve, as one economist, I would say the Federal Reserve needs to increase interest rates faster and harder. And this is a tough pill to swallow. So what does this mean? This means that in order to reduce inflation, we have to have a recession. So right now we have what I would call price insecurity. and I'll get to the social impact of that in just a minute, with inflation rates like we've never seen in 40 years, which causes all sorts of impacts, which is what we're dealing with right now. And I predict, right now we're in June of 2022. I expect 2 more quarters of stubbornly high inflation, which would mean inflation above 6%. And then after that, we're going to move into a recession where we trade price insecurity for job insecurity. Okay. Now, the good news is that this recession will not be as bad as 2008 or 1982 or even 2020. But it will be painful. It's always painful when people lose their jobs. Unemployment could go up to 6 or 7%. Similar to the recessions of like 2001 or 1991.
Okay.
And that recession will probably be 3 quarters. So for the next 5 to 6 quarters, Jamie, we're going to continue to see economic pain. Sort of this double shot of agony in terms of inflation and then recession. Now, when we talk about, if we come back to inflation, if I'm running a nonprofit and I'm serving and I'm generating value for clients or neighbors who struggle economically, you have to understand that while the inflation rate might be 6 or 7%, your clients are spending most of their budget on food, gas, and rent. And those prices are going up faster than the average.
Okay.
So while the average American household may experience 7 or 8% inflation, the poorest households are going to be experiencing 12, 13, 15, 20% inflation.
Wow.
Now, you might say, well, their wages are going up, but their wages are not going up fast enough to compensate for that.
Right.
So, and the media doesn't talk about this. We talk about the inequality of income, we talk about the inequality of wealth, but we don't talk about the inequality of inflation. And so there's both for our neighbors that economically struggle. Not only is it the price impact that the value of their dollar goes down, but the psychological impact can actually be even more painful.
Right.
Because when you're poor, as the listeners of this podcast know, in nonprofits, you're already struggling mentally.
Right.
And so inflation can just double, triple your anxiety level, because when you're poor and you finally get a job with benefits, right? You go, okay, I can meet my bills. But with inflation, you can't predict. And this inability to predict, it leads to shorter term economic decisions, right? So when the dollar's going down really fast, it creates an incentive to convert that, get rid of that cash and maybe buy harder goods, or borrow the money to do that. Because if you're saving money and inflation is a penalty for those that save money and stash away cash in the bank.
Right.
So it's just, and we try to teach households to manage their resources responsibly, and finally, they're being disciplined and they're getting punished for it. So the inflation impact, I think if you're president of a nonprofit, especially serving clients who are economically struggling, understand and appreciate that they may be experiencing double the rate of inflation that the average household is, and that on top of that, their anxiety levels are maybe higher than they've ever been from when they look at their economics and household finances. And now that reframes it. And if you're raising money, you need to bring that to the fore of your donors.
Right.
Because they may look at it and go, well, at least they have a job, their wages are going up, inflation is not that bad, and inflation will go away. No, the pain being experienced right now is much heavier than you might expect.
That's a really good point. And just thinking about that in light of a lot of our clients, especially our urban clients, where they have upward mobility tracks, where they have made sure that they're able to hire people in the neighborhoods they're serving. Your point, Phil, really strikes a chord with me as well, that the individuals they're serving, but then also their own frontline employees are probably experiencing inflation that's much, much higher than what the averages are for the average household, to your point as well.
Absolutely. And then, this is just as important, I think, in terms of making sure that your nonprofit business model is sustainable, right?
Yeah.
So let's go back to the figure that I just talked about. Our labor force is 3% lower of the population than it was. This is millions and millions of people that are not there that we'd have otherwise counted on in 2019. If you run a nonprofit, if you hire people, you need to adjust to a new reality. And that new reality is painful in many ways. First of all, you're going to have to pay your workers more, period.
Right.
And that's going to hurt if you're a nonprofit on a tight budget. But if you're going to keep your people, you have to pay them more. And in fact, it's going to cause your organization less pain if you actually pay above you're comfortable, because you got to keep them, right?
Right.
Because right now, workers have the leverage, and it's not temporary. Our reduction in labor force is demographic. It's not because people are lazy. It's not because people are living off the dole, the government assistance. It's demographic. We are in a permanent talent drought. And I'm giving the same advice to your audience that I give CEOs that run small businesses. Get used to, first of all, paying your workers more, and then investing in a better place to work. Our newer generation of workers from Generation Z and the millennials, they're much more about the benefits of a job that's not related to income. And we're seeing that they're willing to take huge cuts in income to either have psychological reward from their work. They want to feel like there's meaning. They want to feel like there's impact. They want to feel like they're celebrated. They want to feel like they have upward mobility. That's what a good culture is all about. The good news is building a good culture is not a very expensive thing to do. Right. And they're also they also want quality of life. To them, working remote is not a new thing. It's kind of normal.
Right.
But if you have a nonprofit that requires workers to be on site, making it a great place to work and being a really good leader and being a really good boss is more important than it's ever been. But the good news is that investing in that can be cheaper than the wage that you pay. Now, the good news is that the nonprofit sector, on average, delivers a stronger sense of social purpose, right? You're helping out folks that have been displaced from an economy that's very unfair. So I think if you're a nonprofit, you have a little bit leg up versus corporations in that. But you still got to deliver on the goods of wages and benefits, and even more importantly, a great psychological experience for your workers.
That's a great point. And, we see that just from the perspective of our clients, so often, and kind of to your point, the knee-jerk reaction is cost cutting as opposed to preservation. And I mean, as you've just highlighted, and I would say it's probably, the numbers I hear from, I think it was Forbes, was that to lose a mid-level manager, the average cost is about 50 to 80% of 1 year's salary. That's big. And, if I'm looking at fundraising, it's, to your point, it's much, much more effective to not have to replace people than it is to try to forego that or front that cost of staff replacement.
Right. And I think this has a implication for how you deliver your message to your donors, right? Donors want to make sure that you're stewarding their money really well and that your budget is conservative. So I think this kind of labor market pressure makes it more important to talk in dynamic terms of cost, right? And if you're the older generation and you're a donor, you don't think that way. You came from businesses where you took workers for granted, where culture wasn't even part of the vocabulary, right? And it was all about cost cutting. And so I think from a donor, from your messaging, if you get pushback or a lot of scrutinizing questions about how you do it, how you're managing your money, you've got to have this more sophisticated dynamic argument that will resonate with educated donors, but you got to massage your message. This is a very different labor market, and it has permanently changed. It's not going to go back to the way we knew it. And if some donors can keep their head in the sand, but at some point they've got to pull their head out and recognize what it takes to preserve a good staff and what it takes to raise the money for that and to think dynamically and in terms of financial sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent point. And one of the things that we hear a lot, and I'd be curious to see what you see or how you would respond to this, are individuals who maybe have come from very adaptable corporate environments where they've been able to just hybridize or go remote with their workforce, and then trying to project that same sense of application onto an organization that's changing someone's life through direct personal interaction, and they can't hybridize or they can't send someone virtual because of that, or because of just the abilities of the individuals that they serve, that can't connect with them, through Zoom or whatever. What are you seeing with that?
Well, I think that it's real easy to sit back, if you're in a technology company, or you run a technology company, and it's just, to you, remote work is easy. And then why can't a nonprofit do that? Well,
Right.
the way that you come back to that argument is that, look, good businesses start with what the customer needs, right? A nonprofit starts with what the neighbor or the client needs. And if you're economically struggling, you don't have a bachelor's degree. The jobs that are available to you, you don't have the option of remote work. I mean, you live in a poor part of a city and you're working in a fulfillment center, you're working retail, you're working at a factory. That's just a pipe dream. And if you're going to serve those folks, you got to do it on the ground.
Yeah.
And especially if they come from a culture that's high context, like our Latin American or our neighbors from Africa. If you want to, a good nonprofit shows impact. Impact a lot of times is not only providing economic assistance, but changing behavior of the client.
Yeah.
And if you're going to have that kind of impact, your workers have to be on the ground, and your donors have to understand that. So you can start with a business argument where your donor looks at your clients, the people that you serve, as customers.
Yeah.
And then that's one way. That's going to be one way to break that misunderstanding. Well, why don't you just hire somebody remotely for your nonprofit?
Right.
You got to bring your donor back to earth and make them understand that you're running a business just like they do.
Yeah,
assuming they come from assuming the donor has been very successful in the private sector.
It's a really good point, and helping them to translate that supply and demand kind of equation, that I would never try to supply a good to someone which there was no demand in their sandbox.
Right.
And that's kind of what you're saying, which I think is it's a really great way to translate to those donors who may not understand social change, but are just used to just very direct kind of sales widget production kind of models, that you don't produce something that's not going to be in that person's sandbox.
Right.
Yeah.
And having people on the ground, if that's what the client's going to respond to, that's going to maximize the social return on investment of the money they give you.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, there's a really big social return case to make to the donor who cares about whether they're creating value. I love that. So just in our last couple of minutes, Phil, where do you see this going? You've already kind of alluded to a couple quarters of somewhat stability leading into a recession for a couple of quarters. Anything else that you see on the horizon that we should be thinking about?
Again, I would expect, just to summarize, I'd expect at least, again, we're just about to end the second quarter of 2022.
Right.
Through all of 2023, it's going to be painful. Again, inflation is going to remain stubbornly high during the next 2 quarters. We're going to see interest rates going up fast. In my opinion, not fast enough, because the higher interest rates is the medicine to slow the economy down. And then 2023 will be very much economic retrenchment. Unemployment rates hitting 6 or 7%. Prices will stabilize, but then a lot of the people that you serve are going to, at the lower end of the income ladder, are going to face income, or they're going to face job insecurity. And then we're going to come out of this kind of just, shaking our head going, what happened? And, as we enter 2024, the U.S. economy is just going to be it's just going to be a whole different reality. And if you run a nonprofit, you interact with donors, you've got to adapt and just accept the fact that we're not going back to the way things were before COVID. What we're experiencing now is attributable to COVID. It's a knock-on effect. And it's similar to what we saw in the 20s, with the Spanish flu, in 1918, 1919. Mm-hmm. So right. Just 100 years later. So if I'm running a nonprofit, if I guess my message to your listeners, Jamie, is study what's going on and be adaptable. Because if you're not going to be adaptable, you're not going to raise the money you need to raise. You're not going to retain the workers that you need to retain. And at the end of the day, you're not going to deliver the value to your clients that originally motivated you to launch the nonprofit.
That's great. That's great. And if I added one more thread to there, it really is care. I mean, care for the donor, care for your volunteer, care for your team, your staff. And that's really what you're saying is, hey, we've got to nurture and maintain our relationships to create stability.
Pay attention more than you ever have up to what's going on around you, because the world is changing faster than we can cognitively recognize.
Yeah. What a great thing to close on. Be aware and discern.
Awareness. Yeah. Invest in awareness. And through that, your organization can grow and you can get better. There's opportunity here,
Right.
but it requires an expenditure of energy, and it makes us even more tired when I know a lot of your listeners are probably exhausted.
Right. Yeah. And we see that a lot. Phil, this has been phenomenal. Far more than I was even hoping for. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And it's timely now, but the great thing about what you're sharing, it's timely 20 years from now.
Correct.
We'll continue to get mileage as we take these things and put them into practice. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Jamie, for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the J.D. Levy & Associates Calibration Point podcast. If you have comments or ideas for future episodes, please reach out using the contact page on our website, jdlevyassociates.com.